Welcome back to Bookworm's Den, everyone. For this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at Behave, the biology of humans at our best and worst. It's by Robert Sapolsky, and it's a pretty fascinating look at, why we humans do the things we do, but it's not just about what's happening in our brains, right?
No, not at all. What's really interesting about Sapolsky's approach is that he brings together biology and the environment and even culture to try to explain human behavior. So it's
Right.
really this intricate dance between all of these different
Okay,
elements.
so it's not just nature versus nurture. It's like this
hmm
big, complex recipe with all these different ingredients.
Yeah, exactly. And, when you start to understand all these ingredients, it can help us understand ourselves so much better and others too. For example, one of the things that Sapolsky talks about is genes. Yeah, genes play a role, but they aren't necessarily our destiny.
Okay, wait, so you're telling me that my genes aren't like a life sentence?
Nope. Not even close.
Yeah.
You know how sometimes people say, oh, it's in their genes? Well, it turns out that our environment can actually influence how those genes express themselves.
Well, hold on. So you're saying that like the people I hang out with or the stuff I go through can like actually change how my genes work?
It's pretty wild, isn't it? Think of it like this. You might have a gene that makes you predisposed to something like, let's say, anxiety. But whether that gene actually has a big impact on your life or not, that really depends on your experiences. It's kind of like having a musical instrument. You might have a beautiful piano, but it's not going to play any music unless someone actually plays it.
I get it. So our environment is kind of like the pianist shaping how those genetic notes get played.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really interesting. So even if somebody has, a genetic predisposition to something, their experiences and environment can make a huge difference. But how does this actually relate to real life? How can understanding this help us in a practical way?
Well, for starters, it can really help you feel less trapped by your genes. It empowers you to create an environment that really supports, the best possible version of yourself. So, for example, imagine you realize that stress is a trigger for your anxiety. Well, knowing that you can actually start incorporating, stress-reducing practices into your routine, like maybe you try mindfulness or exercise, you're basically changing the environment that your genes are operating in.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So by understanding these environmental triggers, we can make choices that help us thrive. But what about the whole evolution thing? Sapolsky talks a lot about that too, right?
Yeah, he does. And it's really fascinating stuff. So he connects the instincts that our ancestors developed to how we behave today. Like, for example, have you ever noticed how hard it is to resist, like, a donut or a bag of chips?
Oh, definitely. I have a major sweet tooth.
Well, you can blame that on evolution. You see, way back in the day, our ancestors needed those calories to survive.
Hmm.
So they evolved to crave those sugary, fatty foods. It was actually a survival advantage.
Wow.
But now, in a world where we have grocery stores and fast food on every corner, those cravings aren't so helpful anymore. They can actually lead to, overeating and health problems.
So it's like our bodies are running on outdated software.
Kind of. But the good news is that now that we understand that we can actually do something about it.
Okay, so how do we change those cravings if they're so deeply rooted in us?
Well, it's not about trying to erase those instincts. It's more about, understanding them and working with them. So when you feel that craving hit, just pause for a second. Ask yourself, am I really hungry right now? Or is this just my ancient brain, trying to stock up on calories just in case? That moment of awareness can really help you make a more conscious choice.
So we can actually hack our own evolutionary programming.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that. But it's not just genes and evolution that shape us, right? What about learning and all that social stuff?
Yeah, you're right. There's definitely another layer to this whole thing. So we learn through all sorts of ways, like positive reinforcement when we do something good and we get rewarded for it, or the opposite punishment, which teaches us to avoid certain behaviors.
Right.
And then there's social learning, which is basically watching and imitating others.
Like how kids pick up habits from their parents.
Exactly. Social learning is incredibly powerful. That's how we learn social cues, habits, beliefs, all kinds of things. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Sapolsky argues that culture plays a huge role in this learning process. And I'm not just talking about like art or music.
Okay, I'm curious. How can culture actually change our behavior on a deeper level?
Well, imagine different cultures, like different countries, right? Each one has its own set of rules and customs. These cultural norms actually shape how we behave, and those behaviors can actually affect our brains.
Wait, are you saying that like growing up in a particular culture can actually change the way our brains are wired?
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? Think about personal space. For example, in some cultures, standing really close to someone is seen as friendly, but in others, it can be considered rude.
Yeah.
These cultural norms actually shape how comfortable we feel physically. Or think about how some cultures are more individualistic, while others prioritize the group. These values can influence how we think, how we make decisions, even how we experience emotions.
I hadn't really thought about it like that. It's like this invisible force shaping us without us even realizing it. This is all so fascinating. I'm already starting to see how understanding this stuff can be helpful in my own life.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. It's not just theoretical knowledge. It actually has practical applications that can help us, in our relationships, help us make better decisions and even just foster personal growth.
I'm definitely hooked. We've covered a lot of ground already. But it feels like we're just scratching the surface of this book.
Oh, yeah, we've only just begun. But let's maybe take a moment to let all this sink in. What's resonating with you so far? What's standing out as particularly interesting or surprising?
Yeah, it really is amazing how many different layers there are to, figuring out why we do the things we do.
Absolutely. And I really like how Sapolsky doesn't just leave us with all this theory, He
Right.
actually shows us how we can use this stuff in the real world, like in education, politics, even our personal relationships. Exactly. It's like he gives us this really powerful tool to create positive change. And speaking of that, let's talk about education. Sapolsky really believes that understanding how our brains learn and adapt could totally revolutionize the way we teach.
Okay, I'm always up for shaking things up in the education system.
Yeah.
But what would that actually look like? Like, what kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, imagine classrooms that are actually designed, to meet each student's individual needs and learning styles. So instead of that one-size-fits-all approach, teachers would really understand the importance of things like social-emotional learning, helping kids understand and manage their emotions.
So it's not just about academics, it's about helping kids develop emotional intelligence, too.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's super important. I mean, think about it. If a kid is struggling with anxiety, they're going to have a much harder time focusing in a traditional classroom. So by creating a more supportive and understanding environment, we can help them thrive both academically and emotionally.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like a win-win for everyone.
Uh,
But what about politics? I can only imagine how complex things get when you start talking about human behavior in that arena.
oh, yeah, it definitely gets complicated. But Sapolsky breaks it down in a way that's really clear and insightful. He argues that understanding human behavior, particularly our capacity for cooperation and empathy, can play a huge role in creating political systems and policies that actually work.
So instead of just focusing on laws and regulations, we should be trying to understand what motivates people's political beliefs.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing that we're all wired for connection and a sense of belonging. And Sapolsky suggests that if we can understand the biological and cultural factors that influence our political views, we can actually improve communication and collaboration, even across ideological divides.
That sounds incredibly optimistic, especially in today's world where it feels like everyone is so divided. Is that kind of harmony even possible?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, but Sapolsky's work does offer some hope. He reminds us that even though we have differences, at the end of the day, we all share a common humanity. We all want the same basic things: safety, connection, meaning, and purpose.
Right.
And recognizing that common ground can be a powerful starting point for bridging those divides.
It's like that saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Mm.
But in this case, it's more like understanding the biology and the culture that shaped those shoes in the first place.
Exactly. And that brings us to Sapolsky's thoughts on social justice. He's a really strong advocate for understanding the systemic factors that contribute to inequality and injustice, things like poverty, discrimination, and lack of access to resources.
Right.
And he believes that empathy plays a crucial role in creating lasting change.
So it's not just about feeling bad for people who are suffering. It's about actually understanding the root causes of these issues.
Right. Precisely. It's about moving beyond just feeling sympathy and really grappling with the complex social, economic, and political forces that create those inequalities. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that we each have a role to play in building a more just world.
So it's like shifting from a mindset of charity to one of solidarity. We're all in this together.
Exactly. And all of this ties into his exploration of mental health, too. Sapolsky argues that by understanding the biological and environmental factors that contribute to mental illness, we can develop more effective treatments and interventions.
That makes a lot of sense. So instead of just treating the symptoms, we can address the underlying causes.
That's the goal. He talks about the importance of therapy and medication, of course, but he also emphasizes things like managing stress and building strong social connections as preventative measures.
So it's a more holistic approach to well-being. nurturing our mental health from the ground up.
Exactly. And it's really incredible to see how all of these seemingly separate areas, education, politics, social justice, mental health, are all interconnected through this lens of behavior.
It's like they're all threads in the same tapestry. But I'm curious, does Sapolsky address the potential downsides of all this knowledge about human behavior? You know, the fact that it could be misused?
Oh, yeah, he does. He definitely doesn't shy away from the ethical complexities. He acknowledges that this knowledge is a double-edged sword.
Right. Just because we understand something doesn't mean it will be used for good.
Right. It's up to us to use this knowledge responsibly and ethically. It's about promoting understanding and compassion and positive change, not about manipulating or controlling other people.
So it's like we've been given this amazing toolkit, and now it's our responsibility to use it wisely and for the benefit of everyone. I'm feeling so inspired by all these ideas. Like, Sapolsky has given us this whole new way of looking at the world. But honestly, it's a lot to process.
It definitely is. It's a
Yeah.
lot to take in.
Yeah.
But don't worry, we'll unpack it all in a way that makes sense and leaves you feeling empowered, not overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready for more. What are some other key takeaways we should be thinking about as we keep exploring Sapolsky's work? It feels like we've been on this incredible journey, like exploring the inner workings of human behavior.
It's like Sapolsky gave us this secret decoder ring to understand, ourselves and the world around us.
Right. And I think one of the things that really struck me was how much he emphasizes empathy. It's not just about understanding the science, but it's about using that knowledge to connect with others on a deeper level.
Absolutely. One of the biggest takeaways from Behave is that we need to shift away from judgment and move towards understanding. It's so easy to just label things as good or bad. But Sapolsky encourages us to see things from a more nuanced perspective.
So instead of asking what's wrong with this person, we should be asking what happened in their life that led them to this point.
Exactly. We have to remember that everyone is carrying around, their own experiences, their own traumas, their own cultural influences, and all of that shapes their behavior. And once we start seeing things through that lens, it becomes so much easier to be compassionate and understanding, even with people who seem difficult or different from us.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put this into practice? It's one thing to talk about empathy, but it's another to actually embody it in our daily lives.
Well, it starts with self-awareness. Take some time to think about your own behavioral patterns. What triggers you? What makes you feel happy, sad, or angry? The more we understand about ourselves, the better equipped we are to understand, the motivations and behaviors of other people.
So it's like that saying, know thyself. But it's not just about introspection, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about using that self-knowledge to connect with the world around us.
Right. Once you've done some of that inner work, start looking for opportunities to practice empathy in your everyday life. Really listen to what people are saying, both verbally and non-verbally. Try to see things from their perspective, even if you don't necessarily agree. And remember, asking questions is key. Just being genuinely curious can go a long way in building bridges and understanding.
It's like we're all detectives trying to solve this mystery of human behavior.
Yeah.
But instead of looking for clues at a crime scene, we're looking for clues in each other's stories.
I like that. And the more we practice that kind of empathetic detective work, the more we realize that, beneath the surface, we're all much more alike than we are different. We all want connection, belonging, meaning. We all experience joy, sorrow, fear, love, and recognizing that shared humanity is so important for creating a more compassionate and harmonious world.
It sounds like Sapolsky is calling for a pretty radical shift in perspective, a move away from judging and towards understanding, from isolation to connection.
Yeah, he is. And the best part is that this shift doesn't require some grand gesture, It starts with each of us making small, conscious choices every day.
So what can our listeners do to start putting these ideas into action?
Well, I would say challenge yourself to have at least one conversation today where you truly listen with an open mind and an open heart. Resist the urge to judge or give advice unless you're asked. Just try to understand the other person's point of view. You might be surprised by what you learn both about them and about yourself.
That's a great challenge, and I think it perfectly captures what Behave is all about. It's not just a science book, it's a call to action, an invitation to become more empathetic, compassionate, and engaged human beings.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Behave, I just want to leave you with this final thought. The power to create a more understanding and compassionate world is within each of us. It starts with being curious, practicing empathy, and recognizing our shared humanity.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on this journey. It's been a really insightful conversation. And to our listeners, if you haven't already, I highly recommend checking out Behave. It's one of those books that can really change the way you see yourself, others, and the world around you.
Happy reading, everyone.